In this video, I'm going to show you how to take a medium-sized short sleeve men's shirt and turn it into a woman's top with a Chelsea collar, using this as my inspiration. For this project, you'll need some extra materials, including some 1/4-inch elastic for the sleeves, interfacing. I used fusible featherweight, extra fabric for the underside of the collar, as well as some paper for the pattern. So let's get started. Unpick the collar to remove it from the body of the shirt. Cut straight across the plackets, about 1 inch above the second button, then cut at an angle up to the neckline curve where the yoke starts. Fold the shirt in half front to back and make a tiny notch at the back of the collar. Measure from the notch to the button placket by standing the tape on its side. This is the half neckline measurement. Mine was 11.5 inches. Next, we're going to create a pattern for the collar. As a general reference, the overall size of my pattern with seam allowance is about 4 by 15.5 inches, but your measurements may vary. At first, I didn't leave room for seam allowance, so you may want to leave at least 3/8 of an inch around the pattern so you can add seam allowance, or you can make 2 patterns like I did. Make a mark at 1 inch on the vertical side. Using the measuring tape as a guide, draw a slightly curved line down to the horizontal edge using the length of half your neckline measurement, with an extra 1/2 inch to adjust for the placket. For me, that was 12 inches. From the end of the line, measure down another 2 inches horizontally and draw a vertical line. This is the total pattern length. Measure 2.5 inches up the vertical line, then draw a line to the end of the neckline measurement to create the collar angle. Measure 2.5 inches up from the neckline line for the back width of the collar, then connect this line with the point of the collar in a gentle curve. Square the 2 lines in the back of the collar to form a smooth transition between the 2 sides. Then cut out the pattern piece. Since I didn't leave enough room for seam allowance, I traced the first pattern and created a second pattern with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Since I'm going to use the same pattern piece multiple times, I wanted them to be the same size. But I ended up using the pattern piece without seam allowance for the interfacing, so having 2 patterns worked out. To cut out the pattern pieces, I first unpicked the hem and ironed it out for extra fabric because the collar pieces take up a lot of space, which then affects the length of the shirt. But if you have a longer shirt, you may not need to do this. Using the pattern with the seam allowance, cut 2 from the back of the shirt bottom. Cut 1 with the pattern face up and the other with the pattern face down so that the 2 sides line up correctly. To cut the seam bindings, fold the shirt in half at the plackets. Cut across the hemline, leaving the top of the shirt as long as possible. From the front shirt flaps, cut 4 strips approximately 1.5 inches wide. Cut off the button plackets and seams. I used a separate fabric for the back of the collar since my shirt didn't have enough fabric. If you have a bigger shirt or one with long sleeves, you might be able to cut the pieces from your original shirt. Cut 2 pieces with the right sides of the fabric facing each other, using the pattern with the seam allowance. For the interfacing, I used non-woven, fusible featherweight and basically followed the directions on the package. Cut the interfacing using the pattern with no seam allowance. If you only have the 1 pattern, cut the interfacing with seam allowance, then trim the seam allowance off afterwards. To fuse the interfacing to the collar, pin the textured side of the interfacing to the wrong side of the collar, making sure the seam allowances are even all the way around. Steam the edges of the interfacing to hold it in place, then remove the pins. Place a damp cloth over the interfacing and press with steam for about 10 seconds. Iron the front of the collar, then check to see if the interfacing adhered to the fabric. Repeat with the other side of the collar. Next, we're going to piece the various sections together. Sew the two halves of the collar together with the right sides facing and finger press the seam open. Sew the two halves of the back collar together with the right sides facing and finger press the seam open. Sew the sections of the seam bindings together with the right sides facing and finger press the seams open. Actually, I also ironed the seams open, but that's me. Sew the top of the collar to the underside at the sides and around the back with the right sides of the fabric facing each other. Trim the seam allowance and the corners, getting as close to the stitches as possible without cutting them. Turn the collar inside out and push out the corners with something pointy but not too sharp. I use my nail scissors. Iron the collar and the back of the shirt to make them easier to sew. Then top stitch along the sides and back of the collar. Align the back seam of the collar with the notch at the neckline and pin into place with the underside of the collar facing the right side of the shirt. Make sure the sides of the collar align evenly with the sides of the placket and pin the rest of the collar into place. Sew the collar to the neckline. To attach the binding, turn up the end and pin it to the collar with the right sides facing each other. Start at one placket and go all the way around the neckline to the other placket. Turn up the other end of the binding and trim the excess. I had a seam right there, so I had to unpick it in order to turn up the end. Sew the binding to the neckline and the collar. Trim the seam allowance and clip the angles of the placket to make it easier to turn inside out. Fold the seam binding away from the collar and understitch on the seam binding side. Trim the width of the binding to 1/4 inch or so, leaving it long enough to fold over the seam. Fold the binding over the main seam, then fold the seam down and sew into place with a top stitch starting at the button placket and folding the binding as you go. In most short-sleeved shirts, you can simply sew a second row of stitches, then open a section of the original hem to insert the elastic, but this shirt is different because the hem was sewn before the side seams. If your shirt is like mine, sew a second seam below the hem, leaving enough space to insert a safety pin, and make sure to back tack across the side seam to secure it. Pick open the side seam in between the two rows of stitches. Measure the length of your elastic by loosely wrapping it around your arm and adding 2 extra inches for overlap. Attach a safety pin to one end and insert the elastic into the sleeve channel. If your shirt is like mine, you may have to push the safety pin through the layers of fabric to get to the opening. Thread the elastic through the channel, then secure the two ends together with a zigzag stitch. I'm going to leave this seam open because I don't think it will fray, but I did back tack along the hem lines to prevent the side seam from unraveling. My shirt is going to be quite short because the collar used up so much fabric, so I'm going to make the hem as small as I can. To make a tiny hem, fold up the smallest edge possible and iron into place. Fold over once more and iron again. Sew as close to the fold as possible, and oops, ran out of space on the card. But here's what the completed hem looks like. For a final detail, I changed out the buttons, and that's it, we're done. In every video I learned something new, and in this one it was how to sew a proper collar. These refashions are always experiments for me. I never know exactly how they're going to turn out, but I hope that this inspires you to try your own refashioning project. Thanks for watching, and happy upcycling!